Welcome to Blue Iron IP's Patent Myth podcast. I'm Russ Krajak, your host, and the author of Investing in Patents, as well as a soon-to-be-released book called Startup IP Strategy. Blue Iron provides financing for patents, so we look at startup companies and their assets, the patent assets, as having value and trying to figure out how do we create value with those assets. Our view is that 95% of all the patents out there are worthless, and the percentage might even be higher for startup companies. Our aim is to take down some of those existing patent myths and put in better practices so that startups could do a much better job with their IP. In this episode, we're going to look at inventing. Some people think it's easy, but as somebody who's done it, quote, professionally for a while, it actually is pretty difficult. And we introduce a thing called TRIZ, T-R-I-Z, which is an interesting way to go through the invention process methodically, step by step. It's actually work to invent. Let's talk about the myth that inventing is easy. It's not. The best inventions out there are inventions that solve contradictions. And, this holds true for inventions as well as business opportunities that solve some kind of paradox where, the old adage of good, cheap, or fast, you can only have two. If there's a business or a product that solves all three of those, that's usually solving some kind of contradiction. And I wanted to talk about the Amazon's one-click patent and kind of put that in context. To me, as a patent attorney and as an investor who looks for valuable patents, Amazon's one-click patent is genius. It is, and I know this is going to, ruffle some feathers, it is the very example of what non-obvious is. Non-obvious in the legal definition. There's a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth by people who look at one click and say, oh, well, that's just obvious. Well, it's not really. I had run across this thing called TRIZ, T-R-I-Z, a long time ago. And TRIZ is a systematic way to invent. And that really sounds contradictory. Like invention is supposed to be something that just comes to you. The clouds part, the angels sing, and this bolt of lightning comes down, and you have this epiphany, the light bulb moment, if you will. TRIZ is a methodical, step-by-step approach to inventing. And essentially the way TRIZ works is that you take your problem and you state it in a way that's similar to some existing problems. And then you look at the way that those previous problems were solved, and then you try to get the parallels back to your problem set. TRIZ works when you build a contradiction that you're trying to solve. And one of the easiest ways to understand it is think about the contradiction of a boat and the shape of the hull. If I want the boat to be stable, the boat's usually pretty fat and not so long, but it's really slow. Think about some big oil tanker. Well, it's going to be pretty stable, but it's not going to be very fast, is it? But think about a boat that's fast. Well, that's really skinny and long. Think about the old America's Cup boats, but they're not very stable. They tip way to one side and all the guys are hanging out on the other side, trying to keep the boat stable and all that. That's a contradiction. I can have a boat that's short and fat and slow but stable, or I can have another boat that's fast but it's not really stable. And the solution to this, to get stability and speed, and I kind of alluded to that in America's Cup race, is to go to a catamaran. A catamaran is a solution of the boat problem, the whole design problem, that meets a stability requirement, and it also meets a speed requirement. And so that contradiction, when you want fast, but you want stable too, and those two things fight each other, that's a contradiction. Trees is, that boat problem is just one out of many different ways to solve a problem. One analogous solution that you can use. The whole trees thing is fascinating to me. And every time I look at a new invention, one of the options I have for figuring out, can I design around this invention, is to use trees to actually bust the patent. I cannot, admit to you that I do that religiously, but I've run across people who that's their business. They use this specific framework to bust patents, to figure out how to design around your invention, or their own invention if they're writing their own claims, or somebody else's invention if they're trying to get around it. Let's talk about one-click, Amazon's one-click patent. To me, this is the perfect example of the legal definition of non-obvious. And I'll show you what I mean by that. But it's also an example of this contradiction where things just seem to be fighting each other, but when you find the solution, everything just kind of falls into place. There's that aha moment. One click was done way back in the beginning days of the internet. And there was really two big problems going on at the time. One was fraud. There was always talk about websites that were unscrupulous, and they took your credit card and then they went out and, bought a whole bunch of other stuff with it. And there's a bunch of credit card fraud there. There was always the fear of somebody intercepting your transmissions and, with your credit card in it. And so don't put any don't put any personal information in that. And that was kind of before the HTTPS, the security protocols were developed, and kind of the impetus for that. Consumers had a big distrust for shopping on the internet. And part of it were these breathless, news reports. There weren't blogs or anything at the time, but these news reports where things just, somebody got ripped off by putting their credit card on some internet page, and things went bad. And that was kind of the first problem. The second problem is that merchants had an equal distrust of their customers. And there were people who would order stuff and then say they didn't like it, or I ordered it in error and want to return it. And there's a big rash of that, where people just order it for no reason and then return it. And it's, it's not unlike current bricks and mortar stores. I mean, think of Lowe's or Home Depot. Did you know that of all the power tools sold at those big box stores, of all those power tools, a third of them come back as returns, and their policies kind of, encourage that weekend warrior to go to Home Depot on a Friday, buy a whole bunch of expensive power tools, use them over the weekend, and then drag them back on Monday and get his money back, kind of a free rental thing. And, that might be kind of sleazy and unscrupulous, but, it's a side effect of, of those kind of return policies. And for better or for worse, that's the way it is. The problem for online merchants was not just, the problem of somebody ordered something in error. Because there's a big cost for returns. Like Lowe's and Home Depot, the guy shows up on Monday morning with his whole portfolio of power tools, and they just check them in there at the store and then send them back to the manufacturers. And the truth is, Lowe's and Home Depot don't really, they incur some processing costs, but they essentially make the manufacturers eat that cost. So Lowe's and Home Depot don't necessarily get hurt by it. I mean, they don't make a sale, but they just push it off on the supplier. And, what happens? Well, the supplier, has to raise prices accordingly. In the end, we all pay for that bad behavior. And, I'm not a big fan of it. If you're going to, if you want a power tool, like just buy one and build your collection, right? You can never be too rich, too thin, or have enough tools in your toolbox. Anyway, getting back to the one-click thing, really early on, returns were a huge problem for merchants. And, a lot of it had to do with shipping cost. The only game in town for shipping was UPS and FedEx, and I guess the Postal Service for some, but the cost to return the product, it might be $20, $30, $40, depending on what it was. And that shipping cost just killed these merchants. If you weren't ordering a $500 item, if you're ordering an item that was $50, for example, it cost you $35 to ship it back. Well, the merchant lost big time on that deal. And if there were just a few of those returns, just a few percentage, it could just wipe out their entire profitability, make online selling completely a loss for them. So what did merchants do? The merchants really did not have a way of dealing with the returns. So the only real option for them was to make sure they weren't getting bad orders. And what you saw was the merchants making the ordering process multi-step. Okay, you clicked on something, you add it to your shopping cart, and they'd pop up something, a little banner that said, "Are you sure you want to add this?" "Yes, I am." And you go through and order another thing, you put it on there. Okay, now here's your shopping cart. And I got to scroll all the way down and hit next. And then I have to go through another page where I put in all my information and then hit next. And I have to go through another page and put my credit card in there. And then at the bottom, it said, your credit card is not being charged yet. So you hit that button and then it'll say, okay, here's your final order. Are you sure? And you'd say yes. And then pop up one more screen, say, are you sure, you're sure, you're sure? And you say yes. And then finally the order will go through. And that was the way that the merchants were dealing with getting, fewer fraudulent orders. There is no excuse for ordering something by mistake when, part of the problem was there was this fear of ordering something and, by mistake and, ordering something too quickly and, oh, I didn't really mean to. And, there's all these stories about that. This is the situation that Amazon was in. This is the state of the universe, the state of the market at the time that Amazon started thinking about one-click. And, because the whole market was going in one direction in terms of making the buying process as complex as possible, Amazon said, we're going to go the opposite direction, and we're going to go the opposite direction absolutely as far as we can, so that if your information's already in, one button, one click, and boom, you got the thing. Boom, it's on its way. Okay. That fear of ordering something by mistake, we'll let you do it. And that, because the market was going in one direction and Amazon went the exact opposite, that really speaks to this notion of non-obvious. And in fact, one of the ways that we can, show evidence to a patent examiner of non-obvious is that everybody else, or at least other people at the time of the invention or before the invention, we show them that other people say that that's a bad thing. Other people say, ordering things too easily is a real problem. False or orders that were done by mistake are a real issue from a business standpoint. So we're going to avoid doing that. And the way we're going to do that is avoid doing, this or that. But I can take, if I'm a patent attorney, I can take a blog post, I can take, an interview by somebody who's saying, this is a real big problem, or the news stories that say, inadvertent purchasing is a big problem. And, I can use that as evidence to show that everybody's going this direction and the patent is going the other direction. The other thing that happened with one-click is that Amazon's biggest competitor at the time, Barnes & Noble, used that same technology. When Amazon rolled out with it, Barnes & Noble rolled out with it. And there was a lawsuit. And this is a second, another way that, another thing that if it happened and it was available, I could send that, as a patent attorney, I could send that to the patent office and show the examiner, this invention is so good that my competitor is using it. And that's an indicator of value. It's an indicator of non-obviousness in the sense that the market adopted this idea. And the cool thing about one-click was that it was so valuable. It made such a big difference to Barnes & Noble that they were willing to knowingly infringe, and they were willing to go to court to keep that ability. They went to court to fight Amazon on this one-click patent. And it was worth literally millions of dollars just in legal fees to risk. They risked that legal fees. They may win, they may not, but they had to put all that money at risk because they saw this thing as having real value. Now, looking back, it sure did have a lot of real value, because that inflection point when one-click came out was right at the height of where people were very nervous about buying things on the internet. And here comes along a company that says, you know what, we got you. We're going to take care of it. And, this contradiction of returns are a problem because returns are expensive. That was addressed by Amazon by saying, you know what, we'll figure out the return problem. We'll figure out how to do returns cheaply and effectively. And they have. It's the ability to return a product purchased on Amazon is ridiculously simple, and intentionally so. And it removes the doubt, the worry, the fear that consumers have about making that purchase. And hopefully, the bet is by Amazon. The bet is going to be that people will just order more when they don't have that fear of the complexity of the return or whatever. That kind of getting back to trees. I've always loved this idea of trying to formulate a problem in terms of contradictions, where there's two fundamental things that fight each other. And the invention comes from figuring out a way that solves both of those at the same time. You want to be both rich and thin at the same time, or whatever. That concept is just, when you apply it to business or when you use the tools like trees, and by the way, trees is spelled TRIZ. It's an acronym of 4 Russian words together. But when you use a tool like trees, it helps you unpack the problem in a way that you can look at the different elements of it and try to kind of and look at it in a different way. If you can segment out, that problem of merchants having to deal with returns, one way to solve it is just don't make sure the orders aren't fraudulent. That's one area. But what if the cost wasn't so high for handling a return? What if you had a better way of dealing with the return problem so that you didn't put friction in the way of a consumer trying to make a purchase? And that contradiction, that thinking of the contradiction that you're solving, using trees, and trees just helps you unpack that in a way and look at it from just a different perspective, so that you can think about individual pieces or how to put those pieces together in a different way and create a much better business problem. Now, I'll tell you, in the future, I'm going to be using trees a lot more because of that. My friend that reminded me of it told me how he was using it. I'm going to start using it more to try to bust an invention. When I'm financing a patent for a startup, I want to look at it and tear the pieces apart so that I can understand how somebody might design around this invention. And really what I'm trying to find is that optimal solution for that problem currently. And I want to patent around that best solution so that when it gets in the market, other people are going to look at that solution and say, wow, that solution is so good, I'm going to do it even if I risk a patent lawsuit. And if they're willing to do that, they're willing to pay a license fee, or I have a really good negotiating tool with that company for however I care to use that. So those are my thoughts on contradictions and inventions. And the This whole thing was a long-winded way of just showing the fact that inventing is not easy, and inventing can really be helped if you use some tools like trees or other kind of problem-solving techniques to unpack some difficult business problem. Well, thanks for listening. I'm Russ Krajak, CEO of Blue Iron IP. We're a patent finance company where we'll make 50 to 100K investments in startup companies to get them decent patent portfolios. And then we'll do loans against patents at $2 to $5 million for later stage companies that have some revenue. You can find me at blueironip.com. You can pick up my book, Investing in Patents, available on Amazon. We're always looking for new deals to finance and syndication partners with angel or venture firms. And please feel free to get in touch with me, and I look forward to chatting with you.